Start with questions. Would be an easy way out. Thank you very much for inviting me. I was told to speak in English, but if you have questions in Hebrew, I can answer that too. But I will today speak in English. It's a great opportunity and to come to Israel every time, and if I can sneak out of my practice and give a presentation, I do it any time. So that's actually the honest reason why I'm here. Just kidding. I know that my story is a little bit unusual, and so at least, and therefore I personally didn't talk about it for many, many years. I'm now 59 years old, and for decades I didn't say a word about my background. Until my son Tal, he was born in Tel Aviv, in the age of 14, 15, asked me the simple question, Abba, mia Saba sheli? Father, who is my grandfather? And it struck me that I literally omitted to speak to him at all about anything related to my family. And there was a reason why I didn't want to do that, because how you explain a nice Jewish boy the fact that his own father, yours truly, is a Jew, an Israeli, served in Israel Defense Forces, and his own grandfather, my father, was not only a highly decorated World War II German tank commander, but totally convinced National Socialist. So how do you reconcile these two worlds? Pretty hard to do. But I felt compelled to tell my son the truth, and what I told my son, I'm going to tell you approximately what I told him at that time. So every life begins with the time and place you were born in and born at, and I was born in Bamberg, to use the proper German pronunciation, a beautiful city in Germany, in the south of Germany. Anybody ever been in Bavaria? Don't work for the tourism office, but that you have an idea, in the south of Germany, it's nestled between Würzburg and Nuremberg. It's a historic city, 1,000 years old. It's literally a museum, a living, breathing museum, because it's never touched by any wars. And so as a child, when I grew up in the city, I had a lot of history lessons. Who lived where, kings, princes, the only pope buried outside Rome, buried there. I knew everything. But one thing I noticed as a child, not intellectually though, that there was something not kosher, so to say, didn't use the word at that time, about the history, because certain aspects of history were omitted. And they were obvious. For example, 30 miles further east, the Iron Curtain came down. Hundreds of thousands soldiers, specifically Americans, were stationed there. We had 10,000 American soldiers stationed in our city, in the city of 75,000. It's a significant impact on the social fabric. So I knew a war happened, and if foreign soldiers are on the ground in Germany, obviously we didn't win that one. Simple, basic facts that a child like I could put together. I didn't know anything about that war. I asked my parents about that war, and they told me, we don't talk about it. We're moving forward. And when I asked my own parents about my grandparents, I was told the war took them away. So the war was there, nobody talked about it, had an impact on our life, so why does nobody talk about it? There's a word in German that explains it. It's called Totschweigen. Silence until death. Nobody talks. But slowly but surely, my parents started to talk about it because I was nudging him. And I heard two different stories. One from my father's side and one from my mother's side. My father's story began in long walks that we had on Sunday afternoons in the forest. He was an outdoor person, a hunter. I learned how to shoot, how to handle a rifle, how to fish. We had a very close relationship. And he told me over and over again this story. Once he was starting to talk, he talked and talked, about him serving in an elite tank unit in the German army under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg, and my father was his assistant. And on every battlefield that Germany opened, in fighting invasion of Poland 1939, the invasion of France the following year 1940, and then of course Operation Barbarossa, the attack on the former Soviet Union, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. And he depicted it in the sense of the knight in shining armor rolling into battle, heroic battle, and he was a hero. And for his accomplishment to push towards the furthest east with his tank unit, and specifically conquering a town called Orel, before 100 miles further west of Moscow, he was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he adoringly referred to still as his Führer, Adolf Hitler. Now, I didn't know anything about the past, but the fact that my father was a hero, got an award, instilled in me the feeling my father is a hero. Naive thinking of a child. My mother told me a completely different story, though. The war is horror, as catastrophe. Because she was an ethnic German, a Sudeten German. Those were Germans who lived in Czechoslovakia for hundreds of years, preserved their German culture, and as a result of the war, they were evicted, murdered, killed. 1.2 million fled to the west, and my mother and her parents lost everything. It was a wealthy merchant family, merchant business gone, beautiful villa gone in Karlsbad, everything gone. So for my father, glory, for my mother, horror. But I knew there was something else. They wouldn't talk about it, and it had to do with the house that we were living in. We were living in this massive two-story building in downtown Bamberg. It's still standing there. And we rented an apartment from a lady who lived upstairs, the landlady. And my mother told me, or actually instilled in me the living fear, that I was not supposed to talk to the landlady ever unless I'm spoken to because she is a countess, eine Gräfin, a noblewoman. And right next to in the hallway, right next to the wooden stairway leading upstairs to the Gräfin's apartment, was a larger-than-life portrait of a man in a painting hanging on the wall that depicted an officer in officer's uniform with officer's insignia, the Knight's Cross, and an officer's cap, but his facial features were not that of my father, so I figured that's not my father. And when I asked my father about this man, my father referred to him as the traitor, der Verräter, Abogate. And I asked myself, something doesn't click. On the one hand, there is a picture of a man who is bad, he's the traitor. On the other hand, I saw pictures of my father in uniform at home, who was not like him. So what happened? Until the lady upstairs told me the story about her husband. When I was playing with her grandchildren, she told me that this was a picture of her husband, Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who was leading the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on the 20th of July 1944, which of course failed. And he was executed with hundreds of others the same night, and his widow, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs. And from her I learned there was a different picture of Germany that she painted in my mind, a different thing, historic facts that my father didn't talk about. And there were other events. One of them I remember vividly, when my mother took me to a dentist in downtown Bamberg. I love to go to the dentist. I don't know why. I think it had to do with the fact that I could go out of the house because my mother was overprotective. So she took me to the dentist, and I remember the first time we walked up the flight of stairs in this building, same thing, 19th century neoclassical style building, and we walked to the door, and right in front of me there was this glass door. The dentist was on the second floor. There was this glass door, and above that glass door was a beautiful star mounted at the wall. Now, here comes a boy, 8, 9 years old, grown up. I was taught the Catholic principles of faith. My mother was an Orthodox Catholic. I was an altar boy. My mother wanted me to become a priest. I saw plenty of crosses in my own city because it was Catholic, but something like that I never saw before. So obviously as a child, I asked my mother, what is this? And my mother, I remember, squeezed my hand, pulled me up the stairs, hissed into my ear, telling me, don't ask me about that ever again. So something happened that my parents were afraid to talk about or didn't want to talk about. And slowly but surely in school, I was about 10, 12 years old, our teachers started to touch the issue of Germany's history from 1933 to 1945. And what we learned, I'd give you the rundown about approximately what they taught us at this time. 1933, the Nazis came to power. Adolf Hitler established a brutal dictatorship. Concentration camps were erected in Germany. Hundreds of thousands of people disappeared. No more democracy. Hitler started the Second World War. 50 million people plus were killed. Among them, 6 million Jews as collateral damage of war. No Holocaust, no Auschwitz, nothing. And then 8th of May 1945, the Nazis were disappeared and we returned to normal life. Everything is over. Now that was of course not the right way of telling us German history, but that was it. And then came an event in 1972, August 1972, that changed everything. I was 14 years old. The Olympics in Germany. München 1972. And that was an event that we were literally taught about to appreciate it as not only as a sports event, but as a historic event. Because the last time Germany hosted the Olympics, that was in 1936 in Berlin, Adolf Hitler abused it for propaganda purposes. Clear cut. This Olympics of 1972 were the new Germany. That was hosted by the new Germany, the new West Germany. There was an East Germany too, a communist one. And Germany was part of the Western Alliance, part of NATO, part of the growing EU. So that was a new Germany, and Germany also had a new chancellor in 1969. His name was Willy Brandt, who was very different to all his predecessors. Whereas his predecessor Kurt Georg Kiesinger in 1966 was a Nazi, denazified, but he was not only a member of the Nazi party, he was a member of the propaganda ministerium of the Nazis. And his appointment caused a great upheaval, a revolution, so to say, among the young people, very left-wing people that demonstrated in Germany. And in 1969, a new chancellor was voted in. His name was Willy Brandt. And Willy Brandt was not only not a Nazi, he was a victim of the Nazis. He was a socialist who had to escape Germany in 1933, returned to Germany after the war, reclaiming his citizenship, and he made it a point to show the world that Germany is different. And what he did, in December 1970, he traveled to Poland, and in front of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and asked for forgiveness what Germany did. First time in public, a German official shows remorse. And that picture went around the world. In our house, of course, we subscribed to a newspaper. My father read newspapers with me, discussed a lot about current affairs. But this morning, he slammed the newspaper on the breakfast table, yelling, "Wieder ein Verräter," again a traitor. And I was a little bit confused. Why is it so bad in kneeling in front of a memorial? I, as a Catholic, was raised to appreciate that as an act of a sign of humility. Why is my father so mad? And this chancellor, with a great moral standing in the Western world, opened the Olympics in August 1972 to a huge fanfare. And I remember it because we purchased our first TV, black and white though, and my parents invited friends over that actually my father's friends I was supposed to call uncle and aunt because I didn't have any, supposedly. And we watched the opening of the Olympics, all the teams parading into the stadium, great hooray, and suddenly a team paraded into the stadium, changing the atmosphere in the room. Ice cold. Nobody talked a word. That was a team that carried a flag with a star inside. The Israeli team, of course. And I found it funny. Why are my parents reacting like that? Why the adults reacting like that? Because it's like another team. Could be Switzerland, Sweden, United States. I didn't know the difference. That remembered this golden star, the same reaction. Why my parents react like that? And then, a week later, the Israeli team was brutally attacked by a group of Palestinian terrorists, supplied, as we know now, logistically and militarily, weapons-wise, by the East Germans, the communist Germany. They climbed the fence, attacked the Israelis in the Olympic Village, killed 2 instantly, brutally murdered them. And 1 escaped, and the remainder were taken hostage. And the Olympics came to a screaming halt. And at that moment, the German government, deeply embarrassed that Israelis were caught and murdered on German soil, they dispatched highest-ranking government officials to the Olympic Village, among them the Minister of Interior, who offered himself as a hostage in return for the hostages. And actually, several members of the German cabinet did the same thing. And the terrorist leader refused. The terrorist leader's name was Latif Afifi, I think. Interesting enough, this terrorist leader was born to a Jewish mother in Beirut and a Christian father in Lebanon. He was halachic Jewish, and he was the leader of the team. And the German government had to succumb to the demand of the terrorists, and they agreed that 2 helicopters would fly them to the military airport outside Munich called Fürstenfeldbruck. From there, a German military Boeing 707 would fly them to an Arab country of their choice, and there an exchange would take place between Arab prisoners and Israeli prisoners and hostages. That never happened. What happened is the German police organized 2 helicopters, all played out on live TV. The 2 helicopters took off in the evening with the hostages and the terrorists inside, landed behind the closed gates of the military airport Fürstenfeldbruck, and then all hell broke loose. I remember the night sky lit by explosions, the firefight lasting for an hour or 2, and then deafening silence, and finally the news broke. They're all gone. An American journalist conveyed the news. And we were in shock. All gone, and the next day in the newspaper, that picture on the front page that changed my direction, or at least my life in a significant way. 2 helicopters on the tarmac, 1 burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis inside, because the terrorist leader threw a hand grenade in this helicopter and everybody perished. The other helicopter with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats because they sprayed both helicopters with Kalashnikov rifles, and everybody gone. And a huge headline, Jews killed in Germany again, in German. Now, I spoke German, I speak perfect German, it's the first language that I learned, but I didn't understand the part again. What does it mean? Again implies that something happened before. So I asked my father in school, we talked about this terror attack. What do you have to say? And my father said, in our house es ist verboten. It's not permitted to talk about anything related to them, the Jews. Period. And in school we started to talk about, because we had to, and our teachers tried to convey to us the importance that Jews were killed in Germany. And for the first time, when I was 14, I heard the term final solution, the Endlösung, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Eichmann, Mengele, and the murder of 6 million ordered and executed by a democratically elected government in Germany. So we all were guilty. And I came home and talked with my father. I asked my father, because he obviously served in the war, he was on every battlefield, he was a hero, maybe he has more information. I asked him in school, we talked about the Holocaust. What do you know about that? And he said, Bernd, first of all, you have to understand, your teachers are communists. And the Holocaust is a lie. It never happened. So listen to me. So I was caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my father, loved, respected, and feared, told me one thing. On the other hand, my teachers told me something else, and they're good people too. What is right and what is wrong? So out of curiosity, and knowing that I hit a wall when I wanted to talk to my father, I started to read. And in libraries and bookstores were new books coming in, specifically in the 70s, that described the horror. And I learned everything. And I knew, I had the suspicion, if my father doesn't talk, and this is true, there must be something that he's connected with. That is my suspicion. And so I asked my father, and as you can imagine, he wouldn't talk, so I had to gauge a moment in the day that he would talk. And as a child of an alcoholic parent, my father was a raging alcoholic, I knew that there are 3 phases during the day. Phase 1, he was looking for a drink, he was restless, irritable, and discontent, you can't talk to him. Phase 3, he was in la-la land, he was drunk, couldn't talk anything about it too. Phase 2, the twilight zone, I call it nowadays the Schicker zone, I make it up. And in that phase he was a little bit tipsy, he was talking, you could manipulate him. So I started to ask him questions, and the answers came out in 3 phases over the course of 2 or 3 years. Phase 1, I paraphrase my father, Bernd, you have to understand that what allegedly happened, so he already admitted that something might have happened, what allegedly happened, we, the Wehrmacht, didn't do it. It was all the SS. Now that was a blatant lie. I knew that already from the lady upstairs, who told me over the course of the years, and I was interested in her story, and she talked to me, that ranking German officers, including her husband, knew exactly what happened. They had to know. Give an example, Klaus von Stauffenberg was severely wounded in North Africa, was assigned to the Chief of Staff office to work, and he was responsible for this troop supply, logistical supply in the east. And he could never figure out why there's a discrepancy between train capacity and the reality, what they should have and what they really have, until he figured out that trains were diverted to the east, to the camps. He found out. And every ranking officer had to find out. My father knew it too. Decades after his death, I was confronted with the truth that I already knew that was truth, but it was very bitter to swallow still. That found a picture of my father sitting in a conference with two other officers together with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS. And when German military officers sit together with the SS head, the only thing that was discussed is how to secure territories where people were murdered. That was the only reason. Then I found his denazification protocols, which were released 1989 after the fall of the wall. We had access to denazification protocols in the East, and my father's protocol was found. And it was not pleasant to read. It stated that he admitted to human shield operations, killing civilians, and that he was imprisoned for 2 years for murder of civilians, action unbecoming an officer, even in Germany. He was released then. And then 2 years ago, the last nail in the coffin that I received from a military historian when I lectured in Germany, who approached me after one of the lectures in my hometown, Bamberg. And he said, Dr. Wollschlaeger, I have something for you that the family of your father's late tank mechanic wants you to have, because you're the son of the commander. And I said, what could it be? And he gave me his attaché suitcase, and he opened it, it's one of those metal ones, and he opened it, and inside were towels, ripped pieces of towels, and the towels were wrapped into Torah scrolls. And pieces of Torah scrolls ripped in. And I asked him, what does it mean? I knew it about Torah scrolls, and he said, well, when your father's unit invaded villages, mostly Jewish villages in the East, they not only killed everybody, they dragged the Torah scrolls out of the synagogues, soaked them in water, cut them into pieces, and used them as insulation material for German tanks in the cold Russian winter. So my father knew that. Coming back to the phase one, in the time that I grew up, I didn't know that, but I knew he was lying. Phase two, he told me, Bernd, when civilians were killed in the East, they were not civilians. They were terrorists, they we call them. They were combatants. They don't fall under the Geneva Convention, therefore you can kill them. I said, are you kidding me? I mean, I knew enough to counter him. How do you explain then that 1.2 million children at least were murdered, were gassed in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Treblinka, the bodies burned, the ashes scattered on the killing fields, and you tell me that these children were fighting you? You must be, don't say that. I don't understand and I don't believe it. Finally, the last phase of answers, one evening he was drunk. And he told me, Bernd, let's talk about it. What you call the Holocaust and your friends, you don't understand that we had to do it. The world should be grateful that we cleaned up the mess in the East that so many generations left behind, and we cleaned it up. The world should send us a flower bouquet. So he defending the Holocaust as necessary evil. And I looked at him, and for that moment my father was not the man I could look up to, but the man I looked down. A criminal. I didn't want to have anything to do with him at all, because I felt ashamed to be his son, and I was curious to know why them, the Jews. I didn't know much about Jews. The only thing I learned in Sunday school was from our priest that Jews killed Jesus. That's the only thing I heard. Nothing else. So something negative. And so I approached my teacher, a former Jesuit priest, and asked him, what shall I do with that guilt that I'm carrying? And he said, do it like I did. That's I can suggest. Make amends to those who were harmed. I said, that means I have to make amends to Jews that I've been willing to do, but I don't know Jews. And I said, well, I can arrange that the Catholic Church, the more progressive movement Ring of the Catholic Church, invites every year a group of Israelis to Germany, Jews and Arabs, learning from each other, and we invite always a German participant, and you can be the German participant. We pay for that. And so I met for the first time Jews. I was 18 years old. And when young people meet, the last thing you want to talk about is saying mea culpa. It's the first thing you want to learn, what makes you like, what food you like, what music you like. And I must say, I like the Israeli girls a lot. I have to admit that my spiritual energy was not only spiritual in nature, so I leave it by that. And I made friends, and one of the girls, she said, "You like me too?" And she said, "Well, Bernd, we're leaving in 2 days. When you leave, if you really like me, Tacheles, then you have to visit me in Israel." And I said, "Of course." I was a big Schwitzer. I said, "I do that." There was one problem: no money, no passport, minor details. And after she left, I had this energy to do that, and I got my first passport. I worked during the summer vacation, had some money, and with the little money that I left, I hitchhiked to Munich. From Munich, I took a train to Ancona, took a ferry from Ancona throughout the Mediterranean, and I don't recommend that. That's not a cruise. And arrived in Haifa, letting her know from Piraeus that I would arrive at this boat at that time. And I arrived, and she was waiting for me, and I was overjoyed. She was overjoyed, but I had this lingering feeling: what if I have to tell the truth about my father? What shall I do? And all doubts were wiped away when I came to her parents' house. It was a small apartment in Neve Sha'anan in Haifa, at that time a working class neighborhood. And her parents invited me to be their guests. They moved one room, everybody moved in one room. I had a small bedroom that they wanted me to stay. They insisted. Dish of the finest food that they can afford, and falafel, hummus, trina. I was in heaven, and they're speaking with me in Yiddish. I understood nothing. You can't understand Yiddish if you don't have a Jewish background, so okay. Her father knew that this is not the way to communicate, and he looked at me and then said, in halting but clear German, "Ich kann auch Deutsch sprechen. I can speak German." And I asked him, "How did you learn that?" He didn't say a word. He just rolled up the sleeve of his form, showed me the number tattooed, and said, "Ich war in den Lagern, I was in the camps," matter of factly. And here I was, a young German, for the first time in a Jewish home, first time in Israel, first time with Jews. Well, how shall I react? And he said nothing. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Bernd, I don't hate you. Don't misunderstand me. But I want to know if young Germans like you know everything. I don't hate Germans either, because I spent 3 years in Germany after the war in a DP camp, displaced person camp, and I had to learn not all Germans were monsters. But what do you know?" I said, "I don't know. I know that I don't know much." He said, "I will show you." And he took me to Yad Vashem. 2 days later, through the eyes of a survivor, I was guided throughout this exhibit, and it broke me. I could not understand that this is something that my people, my father did. For what? That is murder. And on the other hand, I asked myself, how can these people, with all due respect, I call it these people, that return to their homeland, rebuild their personal lives, their professional lives, build an old country anew, there must be something special. I want to know who they are. And I became interested, curious to understand who are Jews. So on my way back to Germany, I pondered the question, how can I find out more about Jews? Germany at that time, West Germany, there were about 25,000 Jews living in small communities in Frankfurt, Munich, Berlin, München. And you couldn't get in. After the events of the 70s, Munich massacre, German terrorism, Baader-Meinhof, Palestinian terror, the communities were sealed off. There was a tank even in some of the communities, armored vehicle in front of this community. Machine guns were... everything was deployed, so you couldn't get in. But I remember there was this place with a glass door and this star. Maybe that has something to do with Jews in my hometown. And I remember knocking at that glass door one day, and an old man opened the door and looked at me suspiciously and asked me, "Who are you?" And I must have everything bubbled out at once, and I just must have told him something that he felt more relaxed to let me in. I said, come rein. And he led me through this corridor in this small apartment, which was dark. And the walls were plastered with this black granite, and on each granite plate was a name written. And in the corner there was a light, which of course was the Ner Tamid. And I asked him, "What does it mean?" And he looked at me and said, "Well, these are all the names of those who perished in Theresienstadt. Nobody came back. All Bamberg Jews were gone, most of them." And then he led me into his office, a small room. It was closed. It was a very hot day, I remember. The curtains were drawn, windows closed, no air condition, no fan, and it was hot. And therefore he was wearing a short-sleeved white shirt. And he was very pale. His name was Itzhak Rosenberg. And his number tattooed on his forearm stood clearly out. And I stared at the number, and he knew what I was staring at. And I said, "Look, das ist Auschwitz." I was in Auschwitz. My name is Itzhak Rosenberg. What do you want? I said, I told him my story. He said, that's a sad story. Why don't you go to the library, to our library, take a book and read the stuff at home? You're German, I believe you, you bring it back. I said, I don't want a book, I read them all. I want to help you. He said, you want to help me? What do you want to do? And then he looked at me, if you want me to teach you, we need to make a Geschäft. Nothing is for free. You can be my Shabbos goy. I had no idea what that meant. And on the other hand, I will teach you. But it sounded like a great deal because I could get into a Jewish community, help them, and he explained me on Friday, you come at 6 o'clock and I will show you what to do. I was there at 6 o'clock, he came at 7. He said, was machst du hier? He said, you told me I should come at 6 o'clock. I said, nah, do come whenever you want, but you do it approximately. So that's my first introduction to Jewish culture. And then he showed me baked coffee and sandwiches, and he put up the chairs, and it was a small room, barely a minyan, and people could fit barely inside. And when they came and said, before they come, and the members of our community, I have to tell you, they won't like you. Because that's their retreat, and they don't like goys. He called me goy. And when they came, that was it. They asked him, was macht der Goy dort? And I said, don't talk to them, get in the corner, just make yourself invisible, I deal with them. They're all Meshuggah. So that was the way he related. So every Friday, every Saturday, week by week, month by month, I served as a Shabbos goy, and the more I came close to this culture, religion, family, the more I distanced myself from my family of origin. And when I was sitting there in the Stibelech, it was not a real Beit HaKnesset, I absorbed the liturgy, the language, the culture, and I wanted to learn more. And the closer I came, the more I removed myself from my environment, my family, and that, of course, caused some friction. I remember one major incident, actually that was the last one that I had with my father, when Christmas fell on a Friday night. And Christmas in a very Orthodox Catholic family is the combination of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Passover all together. And I can still play this movie in my mind because my mother set the table, symbolic food, carp and lentil soup, and then we went to church, the Mass, and from Mass we went home. The father already decorated the Christmas tree, real candles, and my father was standing right next to the Christmas tree in his finest dark suit, and the Knight's Cross around his neck, singing festive Christmas hymns. And I was not there. Now, when I came back on Saturday, all hell broke loose. My mother was crying, my father yelling, wo warst du? I said, look, stop this Greek tragedy, I had it. I appreciate Christmas, but I don't want to celebrate it with you because you have blood on your hands. You represent this cross as the cross of a murderer. He said, no problem, kein Problem, raus, get out. Well, there was a problem because it was my second and last year in medical school, and I had a scholarship and free studies, but it was still short on money, and I must have been a little bit apprehensive about that because Itzhak knew it, sensed something is wrong, and must have told the others. And one member who never talked to me approached me. His name was Aaron, I never forget him. And he said, du bist der Goy. I said, that's right. Hör mal zu, listen. Deine Jacke ist schmutzig, deine Schuhe sind schmutzig, alles ist schmutzig. I mean, it insulted me, it was not true. Here's 100 mark. 100 mark was a lot of money. Kauf dir neue Sachen, buy new stuff. So on the one hand I was insulted, and then I was given money, which I never got in the community. So I approached Itzhak, and I remember that when I said, Itzhak, Aaron gave me 100 mark. And Itzhak looked at me, I gave you 100 mark? You hopefully asked for 200. I said, no, I didn't. How can I make you a Jew? And you're a goy, you have to ask these things. He had this wicked sense of humor, and I never figured it out. I said, come on, it's a joke, sit down. I said, look, you don't understand us after 5 years yet. We are all Holocaust survivors. We stayed in Germany after the war in displaced person camps. Some of us got their mind together, others not. I remarried, and I married a Goyish woman. She's wonderful. Aaron has no family. He doesn't want to talk to anybody about what happened. You're the first that he shows some interest in. And I asked Aaron about his life, and he started to talk with me. We became friends. And what he talked to me is something that gives me still nightmares. He was one of the Sonderkommandos who survived. And what he told me about what happened in the ovens and in the gas chamber was, for me, the most horrific experience that I couldn't understand. And when Aaron, unfortunately, about 6-8 months later, succumbed to an illness, I was called in 911 in the evening from Itzhak, who wanted me to come back from a university in Nuremberg nearby. And I came to Itzhak in the evening, and there were members of the community there, and he broke the news: Aaron died. We need somebody for the Chefa Kadisha, we have to do it tomorrow, and we don't have enough able-bodied men, you need to do it. I said, I can't do it, I'm not Jewish. He said, you're one of us. And next day, I did, together with the others, the sad duty to prepare and clean the body. We buried him, and Itzhak said, here's the prayer book, he has no family, you say Kaddish, you know it. And I said Kaddish because that was my friend. And after that Kaddish, something happened. I said, if they treat me like them, I want to be one of them. I have no family. I said, Itzhak, I want to become a Jew. Itzhak looked at me, you want that? Suffering. Be a tzedek, be a righteous person. You don't have to be a Jew. I said, I want to be a Jew. He said, well, I feared that would happen, but I know a good rabbi in Frankfurt, he will talk you out of it. I will send you over there, I pay the hotel, the travel, anything, just please talk to him. I don't want to listen anymore to the Mishugat. Okay, I met the rabbi talked me out, wanted to talk me out of it, but we agreed that he would teach me as a student, and I would never ask him about conversion because he doesn't convert Germans. Or the Beit Adin wouldn't do it. So every time I met him, I asked him this question. So when is this ready for the conversion? He said, you don't know that, you should not ask me that. And every time until in April, after 2 years, in April 1986, he finally relented and said, Bernd, I will send your case to the rabbinical court in Germany. How they will decide is up to them. I'm one voice on the court. But until you get to that hearing, which will be probably by the end of the year, you have to undergo certain procedures that are irreversible. How to sugarcoat that, I don't know. It involves a surgery that is a plastic surgery, which is not the nose. So anyway, it had to be done in an Orthodox facility, in a kosher facility in Basel, Switzerland, which I did, and a few days later returned home. Several months later, I had to undergo a kosher mikveh in Metz, in an Orthodox community where the rabbi could sign the certificate that I did it. And then in November 1986, I got a call to present myself to the rabbinical court. And those of you who still can appreciate a very old and dated joke, that this was not the Elizabeth Taylor, Sammy Davis Jr., Las Vegas style drive-through conversion. What they did. But it was a very hard test, not only intellectually, but emotionally, spiritually, personally. They wanted to know everything. And after we finished, about 2 hours later, the rabbis retreated. I had to sit there. It was like they were sitting on a podium, and I sat in the chair downstairs, so to say. And they came back, they asked me to stand up like a verdict. And they said, we read now your certificate. In Hebrew, you understand? I said, yes, and in German. And when they finished, I was speechless because I passed, and they said, the chief rabbi said, your last name, you have no choice. It's Ben Avraham. But your first name, you have a choice. So would you ever think about your first name? I said, yeah, my first name is Bernd. You know what that means? I said, well, something with bear, slaying. Yeah, we call you Dov, Dubi, take it, it's free. So I became Dov Ben Avraham. And it was an overwhelming experience, and he asked me, what do you want to do now? And I responded, I want to become a Jew, not only to be a Jew, but also to be an Israeli. I want to go to Israel. And he looked at me, are you sure? Yes. And with his blessing and his certificate, they sent all the material to the Israeli embassy in Bonn at that time, to the Sukhnut, the Jewish agency in Frankfurt. In 30 days, it took only for me to be recognized, and got my immigrant visa. And on 7th of January 1987, I was slated to leave Frankfurt on a one-way flight to Tel Aviv. The day before, or 2 days before, I went to my parents' house to say goodbye. My mother was crying. She knew that was it. My father was yelling and screaming I should get the hell out of the house. Boged, traitor. And I left. And I arrived in Israel the next day. Was assigned to a kibbutz, learned Hebrew, picked bananas. Do you have any question about banana culture? I have no sampling here, by the way. And afterwards, I was assigned to a hospital in downtown Tel Aviv. It's Ichilov, the old Ichilov at that time, to get my German license up to Israeli par. After that year, I was drafted into the military because I gave up my citizenship. I wanted to become an Israeli. And was drafted at the basic training, officers course, was assigned to a unit, and there it hit me. I said, I'm in uniform here in the Israeli army. It was in Bet El, nearby Ramallah. And if they find out that I am a son of a Nazi, they at best will kick me out of here. The worst, they shoot me in the back. I cannot talk about that. That was my fear. I cannot talk about it. I was not ready for that. And so I didn't. What I did, I threw my past into this virtual closet, slammed the door shut, turned the key in the lock, and threw it away. Now that was a bad idea. And so years and years later, my son Tal asked me this question, "Abba mia saba sheli," and I told him. And 14 to 15-year-old boys, of course, their reaction is sometimes unpredictable. They said, "Dad, it's a cool story. Let me talk in school about it." Don't. My children went in the United States from elementary school to high school, the whole program, Jewish education. And 3 weeks later, on my luck, they talked about Family History Day. So everybody talked about their family history, I guess, dating back to the house of David. I don't know. But my son had I was not there. I was told he raised his arm and hand and said, "And my grandfather was a famous Nazi." Not good. Not good. I was called in school, and the rabbi and the principal were in the same room, and I thought something bad happened. I said, "What happened?" And the principal said, "Dr. Wollschlaeger, you're a respected member of our community. Your son Tal told us a verdrehte Geschichte that your father was a Nazi. What does he smoke? Does he drugs?" Or I said, "No." And I had to take my son out of the firing line and put myself in, and I told him the story. And he looked at me and said, "Did you ever talk about that?" "No, I'm not ready about it." "No, you should." And the rabbi pushed me, coached me, said, "Do it, Bernd. Here in my class, I help you." And I talked about it for the first time. And what the rabbi predicted was true. The first time I came out, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I had this question lingering in my mind, why I never dared to close this circle of life that I opened so many years ago. I have to close this in order to move forward. And so I decided with my son to travel back to Germany 20 years later to visit my parents. And I knew the only place I could visit them was a cemetery. They were long gone. My father died 6 months later after I left from cancer. I was blamed for his death. I was prohibited from attending his funeral or ever his gravesite. In his letters that he sent to me, I was explicitly referred to as traitor. So that was it. My mother died a few years later, or succumbed to Alzheimer's disease a few years later, and I could never talk to her because she was gone, literally gone. And I was looking for my parents' gravesite, and ironically, when you go to the Bamberg Cemetery, you can look it up yourself, my parents' grave is located one row parallel to the wall that separates the Christian from the Jewish cemetery. Very easy to find. You look for the Wollschlaeger grave. On the other side, you see the gravestones of the assimilated, thriving Jews that lived in Germany. They built themselves little temples on top of their gravesite, not simple but real, with pillars. And so everything was visible from the side, and sometimes, according to the sun, it casted a shadow to my parents' grave. And so I told my son, "Look, I don't know what to tell you, but this is your grandparents' grave, my parents' grave, and ironically, they're resting in the shadow of history. The only thing what I could do as a German, looking back, learning the lessons, bad, brutal lessons to be learned, to never make that happen again, to apply the solutions in the future, never to make it happen again, and defend human rights to the best of my knowledge, being brave enough to do that, because we can never go back to that." And that is what my children learned. Now, what my father taught me, he probably didn't intend to do that, but he taught me a very important lesson. That hatred is not a dark force of the universe, dark matter, that just engulfs everything and pushes us to do horrible things. We are passive, we are just succumbing to that, and then we kill people and that's it. No. Hatred is something that we generate every single day because we have the ability to use words. We're the only human animal that can use words. And if words of hatred, of bigotry, stereotype, negativity are being uttered, and they're not being countered by somebody else who said that's nonsense, they will fall on the fertile ground. And the fertile ground is mostly the mind of others. And there they sprout into deeds. And if these deeds left unchallenged, they form habits. And if these habits left unchallenged, people will absorb them and it shapes characters. And if these characters of people prevail, then unfortunately something happens like it happened in Germany. Murder of Jews. Because everybody knew. Everybody knew. It was impossible not to know. But the character was shaped as such that this is normal and we don't look at it. For example, my home city, Bamberg, beautiful town. They had a thriving Jewish community of about 1,200 in a 70,000 city of 70,000. In midst of the city was a large temple, they call it, modeled after a church, massive stone building, hardly any wood. So when the 8th of November 1938 came, the fire department couldn't tear it apart. Some parts burned, but they had to call the fire department, the military, to blow it up. Now that causes a lot of noise. So everybody must have seen it, heard it. But no, after the war, when I did some research, when I was in my 20s, nobody heard anything. Anything. We didn't know it, so that was a lie. And that explains, but never excuses, that the entire people look away, in that time Germans, but I don't blame Germans alone. Everybody does it. I don't let the Germans eat off the hook, but everybody did it. And let me give a short recourse about human history. 1972, in my lifetime, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia murdered in an orgy of Stone Age communism 1.2, 1.3, 1.5 million people. Nobody knows. Massacre. In Rwanda in 1994, blacks murdered blacks in an orgy of tribal war, and 800,000 were butchered in a 6-month period of time. 1 million, nobody knows. Serbia in 1994, Bosnian Serbs herded young and old men to mass graves and shot them in the head. Thousands. Nobody knew, even though the United Nations was stationed right next to it. Did nothing. And then, of course, the mass murder that happened in our neighborhood, your neighborhood, Syria. 500,000 people, plus murdered, butchered, 13,000 in a so-called camp, in a prison, tortured to death. By the way, a little bit of politics, but not confrontational. Those that want to boycott Israel, boycott the West in Israel, when you confront them and you talk about 13,000 prisoners that were butchered to death, 500,000 civilians murdered in Syria, they don't know anything about it. That's just, we don't hear about it, we don't want to see about it. So that was happening. That is what I learned. And what I teach others when I speak about it, young people, non-Jews, that we have to be mindful when words of hatred are being uttered. Very mindful about that. And have the courage to stand up and respectfully disagree. And if it doesn't work respectfully, then turn on Israeli television, how they do it then. We disagree in a more forceful way. Nothing wrong with that. And in my opinion, it is our responsibility to teach our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to return to the human and basic values again. And everybody can change. Against all odds, in my opinion, change is possible. Thank you very much for listening to me, and if you have any questions. I'm willing to answer any question. The reason about politics is the following. A good rabbi told me, don't talk politics in the shul because you have two camps, one that eternally love you and one that eternally hate you. Do that in a respectful fashion, in a personal conversation. If you want to have my personal opinion, I'm happy to share it with you personally. But I'm not afraid to do that, but not in public. So I go from right to left, nothing political. So I start on my right, and then go to the center, and then go to the middle, and then move around. Okay? Yes, please. Ladies first, was in the back, and then the two gentlemen. Yes, please.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
If I do have brothers and sisters, I had two sisters. One died in 2006, and I have a younger sister, she's 3 years younger, who lives in Germany, and we gradually redeveloped our personal relationship again. There was a gentleman over there.
Mine's similar. Do you have any aunties or uncles on your father's side?
Great question. Do I have any aunts and uncles from my father's side or mother's side? For my mother's side, she was the only child, and I didn't, of course not. My father was born in Markt Brandenburg on a farm, and as far as I know, he had about 8 to 9 brothers and one sister. He never talked about them until 2 or 3 years before I left Germany. I asked my mother about these postcards that I picked up on the mailbox with the name Wollschlaeger on the back. Dein Bruder, your brother. I said, what is that? He said, well, your father has a brother and a sister in Berlin. Well, now imagine you were 27 years, the first time that you have a brother and a sister, an uncle and aunt. I said, I want to see them. So I traveled to Berlin, and I met my uncle Jochen and my aunt Ursula. Very nice people, and they were exactly the opposite that my father represented. My uncle Jochen was in a Strafkommando, because he was a socialist. He was sent to a special unit where he got killed in battle. The worst, minesweeper, whatever. And he started, after the war, living in East Germany looking for the communist paradise, but that didn't happen. And so he moved back before the wall was built to West Berlin. And so I met him, and he told me the story about my father. My aunt, the same thing. She told me stories about how my father grew up. That my father was one of those hotshots from the very beginning, and he volunteered to be in a special school called National Socialist Political Education Institute, Napola, the West Point of Nazis. So my father was one of those. They were not. Last question here. Then I go in the center, and then in the middle, and then please. Okay, then I go in the middle. Yes, please.
It was unbelievable to listen to it. So moving. Have you spoken in Germany to non-Jewish audiences?
Have I spoken to non-Jewish audiences in Germany? Absolutely.
Yeah. People of your father's age, or?
No, my book is going to be published in March and released at the Leipziger Buchmesse in Leipzig, a book fair. And so I have a couple of interviews lined up. And when I was in Germany the first time to speak about my life 2 years ago, I was speaking to schools, so children between 14 and 16. I was speaking at university, non-Jewish adult audience, and in churches, 2 churches. So what I vividly remember, is one reaction of a girl. She was about 15. After I gave a short version of my life, she looked at me and said, I don't understand what you said. I said, oh, that's bad news. I have to start again. And she said, well, what I don't understand is why the Jews? I said, well, they were persecuted. Yeah, but the Jews are like us. She internalized Jews and Jewish life to their education as something that is part of Germany. Not only Catholicism, Protestantism, Islam, but Jewish life. And I said, how did you meet Jews? Yeah, we have meetings in the synagogue once a year, and we listen to the service. That was amazing. And the most Germans that I met are people that are, on the one hand, apologetic, on the other hand, they want to know more. So if you look for the safest place Jews can live outside Israel, it's Germany. I'm not kidding. There's a question right here. I finished with a question in the center.
Who did you marry?
Whom did I marry? Not the girl. It went kind of infatuation and fell apart. Then there's a question here.
Really, thank you so much. It was such an honor and a privilege to hear your incredible talk. I was going to ask also, who did you marry? But your comment about the dentist, it's really appreciated.
Well, you are.
No, but really a big issue quite. It was a phenomenal
Thank you
talk.
very much. I have a question from this lady, and then I come to the middle.
Why did you get interested in addiction medicine?
Probably because growing up in a household of an alcoholic, there's a lot of damage and abnormal behavior, and when I worked through that, I was interested to see what can be done, and learning more about it, I then decided to get a board certification in addiction medicine. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions.
One question.
Well, my one question is, have you any knowledge of any other Germans who converted to Judaism?
Yeah.
I do remember the second one. The second question is, if you have any opinion how to handle a Holocaust denial at the moment?
Let's start with a difficult question first. Holocaust denier. It's like with any other ideology or faith. If it's so rigid and so literally calcified in the mind of a person, you cannot convince them. It's waste of energy to talk to them. It's waste of energy. What you have to do is you have to prevent them from spreading the lie. And that takes legal action, takes personal action, but you cannot change them. It's just, I met them plenty. In the United States we have a very active National Socialist movement, and neo-Nazis, very organized. And they actually on Holocaust Memorial Day, International Holocaust Memorial Day, 27th of January this year, they didn't mention in their more political wing, it was releasing a statement that all the people that suffered during the time need to be remembered, and not a word about Jews.
Sorry, Martin, then about if you know any other Germans who...
Any of the Germans that converted? Yes, I met people that converted, very convinced religious conversion. One of them I met in Kiryat Arba, so there are a few here and there, but married Jews. Then I go here in this section, and then I go back to my...
Yeah.
Yes, sir, sir, yeah.
Since you...
There was a gentleman standing up here.
I'm a survivor from Holocaust. Okay. I want to understand what the last words, what you said in Syria, there's so much there, and in Kosovo there was so there. Is this an excuse? I don't see the connection of this death and the Holocaust death, the 6 million. The 6 million Jews, they killed because they were Jews. Here, there's quite a different way. I don't like that you compare this kind of, I don't know if this is a sort of excuse what you said.
No.
That you want to say, no. Listen, all the world is killing, no. and we killed also?
No, sir, with all due, I very much appreciated you asked this question. With all due respect, that was not what I said. What I said, that first of all, the Holocaust, as we know it, is the eclipse of human hatred and human behavior, the worst of it that came to bear, the eclipse. Nothing can exceed that because it was so horrible. But we need to understand that the genocides that happened since then continue. We need to ask ourselves why this, if there's anything similar to this behavior that led to the murder of Jews to other events. And there are some similarities which doesn't take the uniqueness of the Holocaust away.
What similarity is the killing? It has nothing to do because here they killed because we were Jews.
Absolutely.
Only because of this.
I totally agree with you.
The other killing is different. There's a sect that they are killing because one is killing the other one. But here, the Jews were killed because because they were Jews. This was the killing. You understand? And this is, you can't compare any killings in the world and never happened.
I honestly apologize when you got the impression that I compared the Holocaust to any other genocides. What I wanted to point out, if we had learned our lessons from the Holocaust and really learned it, we would be able to appreciate these genocides that are happening around the world and to fight them. because every human life saved is a human life gained. So I understand absolutely what you said. There is no comparison, but we need to see how we can handle this massive genocide that has happened over and over for religious reason, tribal reason, whatever reason, political. And in the case of Am Israel, it was purely ethnic and religious, purely. Thank you for saying that. There was
Have you been discriminated against at all? Because to be really a Jew, you have to experience the experience of being defined as the other and being discriminated against.
Very good question. I personally have not experienced discrimination. Not in Germany, not in the United States, not in any place that I've been, yet. My son always tells me a story. My son is about 2 meter tall, 2+, former football player. He looks like a big man, and he's Jewish. I said, Dad, I asked him, what would you do if somebody would blame you to be a Jew? I said, he would do it only once. Very simple. I go, okay, question, then I go in the back, yeah? Yes, ma'am?
When I was listening to your story, it was so similar to somebody that I know who didn't learn of her father's Nazi past until she went to her parents in Germany and said that she was studying Judaism and was going to convert to Judaism, and her father became outraged. Why didn't you come to me before? We would have spoken about that. And then little by little it came out that he was a Nazi. That was the last. She converted, married a Jew, and settled in Israel. What is, never mind, you had answered that question before, sorry.
Thank you. And there was a question here, and a question there, and then I need to go back. Yes, this man, yes, sir.
You grew up in Bamberg with many...
There's a lady up behind you with a first, and then it comes.
Have you ever been invited to speak to a Muslim group, and if so, what was their reaction?
Interesting question. If I've ever been invited to a Muslim group, yeah, I spoke in Dearborn, Michigan, in the university, which is one of the largest Arab American settlement, a large inhabitants there, and I spoke there. And interesting enough, I didn't get a bad reception. They asked me questions about about Judaism. How can I be attracted to Judaism when Judaism does X, Y, and Z in Israel? And I said, look, there's some very serious differences, and you don't blame people by individuals because of politics. And we talked. It's difficult, but it's possible. It's only possible if the other recognizes you as a partner and as a honest participant in a discussion. If they refuse to discuss anything with a Jew or an Israeli, then you have a problem. Then there's nothing you can talk. But we were able to have this interesting discussion. Of course, my position is different to theirs. But for example, if you want tidbit, when I talk to Muslim groups, at least I got the response following: you Jews don't belong, and that's what they say. You Jews don't belong to the Middle East because you don't have any history. Just the Holocaust made you come back to Israel. So well, it's factually wrong on every single level that you can guess. But let me point out the following historical facts. So there's a lot of disinformation, plain simple propaganda, and that takes patience and time to talk, if you can do it. If you can do it. It's now getting, unfortunately, very radicalized, but people don't want to listen to you anymore. I take the last question here, and I'll come back in, because there's something here. There's a gentleman who was sitting in front.
Yeah, I was thinking about the peers in Bamberg that you grew up with as a child, and your journey is very different from theirs, in most of them anyway. So what do you think is different between their psychology and emotions from you, or your motivation from them?
So this is in a very brief review about what happened in Germany. First of all, my peers struggled with this issue, being a German, being guilty, that parents participated in the murder of Jews, responded in a very different way. I'll give you one example. When I traveled with my friends in the 70s through Europe, hitchhiking or Euro train, whenever we were asked where you are from, I said from Scandinavia. Because I didn't know how to say I'm from Germany, because there were still lingering stereotypes. So my friends, I have one friend that I met last year again, and he said, look, I appreciate what you've done, but you went way over the deep end. Not because he doesn't like the Jews, it's because you don't have to go so far. So that was the only negative reaction I got. Last question here, then I go over there, then I come back.
How do you feel about Berlin becoming a cool place for Israelis?
The milky story? I know what the story is, the milky. It's cheaper in Berlin. Well, Berlin is a very interesting city, which on two levels. Now I have the one positive political remark about that. Germany moved after the unification its capital from Bonn to Berlin. And that was not disputed by the world because it's a new Germany. If Israel would move, it says Jerusalem is our capital, and it's, oi boy, that's not acceptable. We have historic precedences where it's acceptable or not. That is acceptable and that is acceptable. So it moved its capital to Berlin. And what happened? It became this gateway from all over the world internationally, and including about 30 to 40,000 Israelis who have German passports because of their parents, can work in the EU, can live in Israel. So it became this cultural mecca for Israelis. And there's a lot of Israelis that make their living there in their life. I say, why not? If Berlin is also open to and honest about its Jewish history and promotes it, the Jewish institutions. About 200,000 Jews live in Germany, about 120,000 are registered in Jewish communities, open Jewish communities, very, I would use the term liberal. So my personal opinion, it can only help. Let me go over there and I come back here. Yes, Henry.
I have the following question. Evidently your father was a pathological hater of Jews. I think I get this.
Yeah.
Discussing. Now, would you say that the group that he associated with, he was a lieutenant colonel in the Wehrmacht, and basically, was that a prevalent feeling? Because I read things that the Wehrmacht really wasn't so. And with the people that he surrounded himself with, were they had the same attitude that he did?
Well, that's an interesting question. If you heard it, my father was a lieutenant colonel, and my father was, I'm repeating the question, my father was a lieutenant colonel, and the people that he surrounded himself were also infested by this National Socialist idea. Paraphrase your question, right, Henry? The answer is yes. I met among the ranking officers in my father's house once a year. There is a celebration, the Alten Kameradentreffen, old comrade meetings. And there was the son of Guderian, who was a general then already. There were ranking officers from the Eastern Front involved in battle, Eberbach, and they were interesting enough. Some of them were the National Socialist propaganda, the others were the old fighters and needed the military as their profession, but they all didn't like Jews. But one thing, in one episode which I found this controversy always comes up, in 1965, I think, Germany and the United States struck a deal, West Germany and the United States, that the Americans would deliver advanced tanks to the Bundeswehr, and the Germans would train Israeli officers on these tanks, and then deliver these tanks to Israel, and would then replenish with new tanks from the United States. That was under Earhart. Now, the problem is it had to be secret because Germany was not allowed to participate in international trade with conflict zones. And my father was one of the officers who trained Israelis on these tanks. And he told me, because he had all the experience, he was one of the experienced guys, and he told me when we came in the discussions, those Jews, the fighting Jews, were different than our Jews. These guys fight and win. It's crazy. It's crazy, but that's what he is the opinion of. The question here, I come back. Yes.
I'm curious, why is
to
Oh.
the United States?
Why did I leave Israel to the United States? That's a good question. After the first Gulf War in 1991, I was actually mobilized in Miluim and my residency training interrupted. My wife, who is an American Israeli, said, I really had it. She lived here already 20 years. I want to go back to Miami to my family. If you want to stay, stay. Well, that was a problem. That was my family. So I moved with her to Miami with the intent to do my residency training for 3 years and then come back. And then we have another year and another year and another year. No excuse. But in the end, it's like pearls on the string. I live there now since 1991. Go back. My home I consider here, and I go back at least once a year. But it's not the same. Good question. Yes, ma'am. Come back.
Have you ever thought of changing your last name?
Yeah,
So not to be-
that's a great question. Very good question. It's a very good question if I ever changed my last name. I was struggling with it if I should or should not. In Hebrew it's actually not a difficult name. Vav, Vav, Lamed, Shin, Lamed, Gimel, Resh, Deo. But I came to the following conclusion. I'm proud who I am. I'm proud what I achieved. I have a wonderful family. And Dafka, because my father was such a hard person, I will keep this as the Jewish branch of our family. Now there is a little thing involved that I have found out just about 2 years ago, that from my mother's side, the maiden name is Mori. Mother's side, there is something unique, and I didn't know that. I learned it from my older sister who died in 2006. She said, Bernd, whenever I talked with our mother about our appearance, physical appearance as daughters, she specifically, my mother had a very olive tint skin, brownish skin, very thick dark hairs, and so did my sister. My sister traveled, she always was taken by Israelis as a Jew. She had Jewish boyfriends and Israelis. So I did a little research and I found two things. My ancestry from my maternal grandparents date back to the 15th century, 14th century in northern Spain and France, southern France. They moved then towards the east and then all tracks were lost. So there was some superficial, maybe. Then came the genetic testing available for the average Joe Blow like me. And the genetic testing, according to a genetic counselor I did, I have two set of genes, hopefully. One of them is from my father's side, very Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian. And from my mother's side, it's a whole distribution between Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. So it could be that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, one of my forefathers were either Muslims, Moors, or Jews who migrated into Spain and then fled. So it could be that I closed a huge circle. Then I will change my name because then I find out. I go with the last question here, then I go here and go here and go back. Yes? Yes, ma'am.
Recently, there's been a lot of writing about the very flourishing, burgeoning neo-Nazi movement in Germany today. I was wondering if there's any recognition on the part of the government and if there's anything being done to correct this problem.
The question is, there is in the last few years a burgeoning and large neo-Nazi community in Germany. The German government, and just recently with the Supreme Court decision in Germany, has the following political disposition. We don't drive them underground by prohibiting them to be a political party. We watch them to be open. And we infiltrate them with enough informants to find out what they're doing. And that's what the German Secret Service does. It's not that large that we believe they're allowed, but what's concern is in Germany is that there's a kind of a para-neo-Nazi movement coming up like the Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, and other groups. I've spoken with one representative of the AfD when I was in Germany just for fun, and he said, we are right and nationalist, but we respect our Jews and want our Jews, and we want them to stay in Germany. So there is a difference between the more rightish wing political parties and the complete crazies neo-Nazis. I'm more concerned about neo-Nazis in the United States, I'm telling you. Little anecdote. I gave a presentation in Carolina, and I had to go through the tri-county or tri-city airport and driving to Beach Mountain in Carolina. And I came to the neighborhood. There were on the roadside, signs. This road is sponsored by the National Socialist Movement of the United States. So that's nice. How that comes together? Well, they're National Socialists that in uniform that clean streets and then dedicate the streets to their effort. Slightly of concern, but I don't know what to do about that. I take a question from here, and I go here, and I go here, and then go back there. Yes? There was a question, then I go here. Yes, sir?
As you were going through your educational and spiritual process in the 70s, did you find like-minded young people like yourself, not necessarily converting to Judaism, but people that were aware and made themselves aware, like yourself?
Yeah, but like-minded in the sense that they wanted to understand what happened and that's it, and not change their lives. I think the struggle of the first generation after the war was how to form an identity with that guilt on your shoulders. And that had to be separated. There's nothing wrong to be proud to be a German, but there's everything wrong when you carry this burden on it. That's still a struggle. Well, it gets better and better. And the German schools are very much involved in teaching, they call it genocide prevention education, and going to Auschwitz, Birkenau. There's a lot going on, And you also have to appreciate, and I say that always, not because I want to defend Germany. Germany has a very strong relationship with Israel that is appreciated across all parties of its whatever political façon. They're very supportive and a solid friendship. I mean, if you look in the Mediterranean, you see a U-boat. 6 of them were purchased from Germany, and a third of them paid by the German government. Very sophisticated U-boats. Don't want to go into depth with that, but that is something that needs to be appreciated too. There's a question over there.
I just want to get some advice from you. Going back to Germany and giving lectures, and when you possibly see people of your father's age, how do you come to terms with that kind of thing? And I'm asking you for myself because I've never gone to Germany. I've always been, my parents were, you don't buy German goods, you don't do this. And I like to think I'm open-minded, but I don't know how I would come to terms if I ever went to Germany and saw these people. How do I do that?
The nature of the time is that time heals when people die. So you don't find many of those still, and those that are actually those who are still there have participated. There was actually just recently almost conclusion of a trial against a Nazi concentration camp guard who was 90-something. Regarding Germany, not to go there. I hear that among American Jews a lot, and I asked them, "Do you like to deny your own identity?" And what I mean by that is, Germany was the home of the Rashi. There's still the house of the Rashi in Worms. Thank you, helping me out. It has a flourishing Jewish community, a government that is totally committed to Jewish life in Germany and in helping and rebuilding it. And of course, what I mentioned, the military cooperation, political cooperation, it's actually a partner that in return one should go and travel and not deny his own identity. There's another thing, not that I want to get political, but the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, the Orthodox movement, leaders of these movements came from Germany. Samuel Raphael Hirsch, Orthodox, was born in Frankfurt, and the Orthodox belief and shaped the movement of the Orthodox movement in the United States, conservative movements, reform movements from Germany. So you would deny your own identity not to go there. Don't get Hitler's final victory that you avoid going there. There's a question here.
I always ask the question. I grew up in the United States, and as a boy, 14 to 15 years old. Was anybody pittance. My parents were not talking about it. It wasn't the subject. And my question is, who am I afraid of? Am I afraid of the Arab community? No. Actually, who am I afraid of is us. And I went to Germany, went to Berlin, went to Dresden, a few other places. And I came away with this conclusion. It could happen again with the right person who has charisma, who can get the crowd together and blame it on something. It may not happen in Germany, it could happen somewhere else. Okay? And second of all, what I come away with the conclusion, in fact, what happened in the United States back in the 40s, and what happened with the publications in the big newspapers, they pushed it on the 20th page, small print about what was happening. And I think basically when I go back to the United States and I confront, I go to Atlanta, Georgia, I go to Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm looking at the same problem. It's us. I know we have a problem with this in our.
I think I'm phrasing out the question if I may, so that others have the question.
The question is that who am I? The same thing is happening today.
Well, I'm referring to you to a book published in 1930 something by Seymour Lewis. It can happen again. Sinclair, thank you. Thank you. Sinclair Lewis. It can happen here. He describes the evolving totalitarian, authoritarian movement in the United States that can happen. That was in 1932 or something. It can happen, unfortunately, and if that would go into a destruction of the Jews in the Second Holocaust, I mean, that was not his intent to describe it, but his intent was to describe that human nature didn't change. That's what I want to point out. Human nature doesn't change, the mechanism of hatred don't change, regardless if you're German, Cambodian, or Serbian. Unfortunately, that doesn't change, and that is what scares me, that if people ask me, can the Holocaust happen again? I said, sadly, yes. Not in Israel, but it can happen in some countries. So I go back to this section, then yes, please.
My name is Tzvi Herschel. I'm from Holland. I'm a survivor. I'm a child survivor who was in hiding. I'm currently a lecturer in Holocaust studies. And I give my lectures also in Germany, universities, high schools, gymnasia, etc. I just came from Holland, from Germany, from Hamburg. On the 27th of January, I gave there a lecture, and the Secretary of State of Schleswig-Holstein was there as well. And by the closure of my presentation, he was crying. He's about 46, 47, and he said, what did our grandparents, great-grandparents did? I'm ashamed of it. But that's one thing. The other thing, what's more important is that I noticed in the students, they are fighting with the collective guilt of their great-grandparents and their grandparents. They don't know how to cope. And they ask me, what can they do? That happened to you as well, and what is your answer?
Number one is to fight hatred in any simple form, any shape or form that comes up. And there are plenty of opportunities to do that. Speaking up. The schmutz, what is happening in universities in the United States with the BDS movement, it is clearly targeted anti-Semitism. Personally, if you encounter anybody who utters words of hatred, the BDS movement, we can act against it abroad. The political stigmatization in Israel can target it abroad. The use of the Holocaust for every word that has nothing to do with the Holocaust. In literature, they use Holocaust for pretty much everything. That is not right, because it's a unique event that happened that cannot be commercialized. So it's a lot of work, but it can be done. Now I'm getting confused.
and gentlemen, I've got down on my notes that it's time to say thank you to Bernd. Truthfully, I don't know what to say. I'm half in tears and half in admiration. I'd just like to say to Bernd, thank you so much for being Bernd, and thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. It's been an amazing experience, I'm sure, for all of us. And I want to thank you very much for all coming this evening, and it's always our custom in this shul that when we have a lecturer, we have a presentation of a certificate. Now this evening, because we partnered, or I partnered Rini really and Henry have been responsible. They initiated this whole activity of asking Bernd to be our lecturer here. I'm going to ask Rini if she will join me in presenting this certificate to Bernd. We won't be finished immediately, but that's the first thing.
We'll get more besides this.
So, Rini, I'd like you to read this certificate.
This certificate is presented by the New Synagogue of Netanya with grateful thanks to Dr. Bernd Wollschlaeger in appreciation for his lecture, A German Life. Against all odds, change is possible. Jeremy Rosenstein is the chairman and he signed it. February 18th, 2017. Bernd. Thank you.
But it's Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold it.
Now we're going to come, Bernd,
Wait,
you
we're
better
not
come
through.
back.
We're not through. No.
There is now going to be a special presentation that is being made to you, and in one moment, let's give you this presentation, and this has been arranged by my very good friend who partners me in all of the things that we do here in terms of the publicity. And I'm going to ask Jacques if he will present this, we'll all present it to you. And Jacques, please explain what this is.
Okay. These are 3 books written by a journalist, ex-German journalist. It's written in German, and this lady is a journalist and she lives in Tel Aviv, is married, had children, has another entry to that country, and she is writing thrillers. Now these thrillers are special because the scenery is Tel Aviv, and I thought, Bernd, that you know so much about Israel and what's going on and so you should also know about the thriller scenery, and that's why I asked Katarina to prepare these 3 books. They are signed, and here you have also a letter from our shul in German, and that's for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to have now a very short session on what forthcoming events that we have in the future.